6 schoolboys vanished at sea. Back home in Tonga, their families held funerals. Death certificates were signed. Everyone believed the Pacific had swallowed them whole. 15 months later, an Australian fishing boat passed a deserted island, and 6 wild-haired teenagers suddenly dove into the waves, shouting, "We are 6 boys from Tonga, and we've been here for 15 months. No adults. No phones. No GPS. Just a jagged rock in the middle of the ocean, and whatever they could build with their bare hands." They learned to grow their own food. They hunted wild chickens. They guarded a single flame that never went out. And when one of them shattered his leg on a cliff, what the others did next should have been impossible. This isn't a movie. It's a true story that destroys the Lord of the Flies myth. 6 boys. 15 months. No adults. So why didn't this turn into real-life Lord of the Flies? The Kingdom of Tonga in the South Pacific. On the main island, Tonga Tapu, 6 boys lived at a strict Catholic boarding school. Sione. Stephen, everyone called him Fate. Kolo. David. Luke. And Mano. They were 13 to 16 years old, into rugby, trouble, and any adventure that broke the school routine. Classes, chores, prayers, lights out. Every day the same. To them, it felt like a cage. If you've ever stared out of a classroom window and dreamed of running away, you already understand these boys. One evening, their boredom turned into a plan. "Let's take a boat," someone said. "We'll go to Fiji, maybe even New Zealand." On a classroom map, those names didn't look that far. Fishermen went out in small boats all the time. How hard could it be? Late one night around June 1965, the 6 boys slipped down to the waterfront and borrowed a 20-foot whaling boat. No engine, just a mast and sail. They loaded a few bananas, some coconuts, a bit of taro, and a huge amount of teenage confidence. No compass. No charts. And they didn't tell a single soul. They pushed off into the dark. They thought they'd be gone a few days. They were wrong. Within a week, their little joke was going to turn into a fight for their lives. At first it was fun. They took turns at the tiller. The sea was home to them. They laughed, sang, talked about New Zealand like it was a promised land. Then the sky changed. Clouds thickened, wind rose, waves grew. The storm hit. Rain slammed into them. Wind ripped at the sail until it tore apart. The rudder snapped. In just minutes, their boat went from under control to completely helpless. Now it was just a wooden shell tossed by the Pacific. Water crashed over the sides. They bilayed with their hands and whatever containers they had. Food washed away. Days blurred into nights. By around day 4, they were out of fresh water. Some tried to drink seawater. It only made things worse, vomiting, dizziness, burning thirst. Others spread out scraps of cloth, catching rain where they could, squeezing every drop into their mouths. So how do 6 kids, with almost no food and no water, survive 8 days in the open Pacific? They hang on. But only just. They drifted like this for 8 days. No land. No ships. No idea where they were. On the 8th day, land finally appeared on the horizon. But it wasn't the rescue they were praying for. As they drifted closer, hope turned to fear. This wasn't a white beach and palm trees. It was a cliff. Ata, the southernmost island of Tonga, a steep volcanic rock rising hundreds of meters out of the sea. No lagoon, no harbor, just jagged stone and pounding surf. 100 years earlier, Ata had been a real village until a Peruvian slave ship arrived, kidnapped almost everyone and shipped them off to guano mines. Survivors were moved away. Ata was abandoned, declared taboo. The boys had no idea they just landed on a cursed, empty island. They only knew one thing. If they stayed in the broken boat, they'd die. They waited for a break between waves, then jumped. They fought their way through the surf and clawed onto the rocks. One by one, they dragged each other up, bleeding and exhausted. Behind them, their whaling boat smashed to pieces against the cliff. Now they were stranded on a near-vertical island with no boat, no visible fresh water, no houses, no people, and no one on Earth who knew where they were. Somewhere out there, their families were already fearing the worst. Within months, they'd be declared dead. On Ada, the 6 boys looked at each other and understood. No one is coming. If we want to live, we're on our own. What they built next, with no adults and almost no tools, would keep them alive for more than a year. From the sea, Ada looked dead. Up close, it had secrets. Climbing carefully up the steep slopes, the boys began to explore. They found old stone terraces, overgrown banana plants, wild taro, and feral chickens, descendants of birds left behind long ago. They also found water, not rivers but tiny springs seeping from the rock, and rain pooled in basins. They chose a plateau high above the waves for their main camp, safe from the ocean, close to food and water. There they got to work. They built sleeping huts from palm leaves and branches. They replanted the old terraces with bananas and taro. They trapped wild chickens and fenced them in so they couldn't escape. They turned the hollow trunk of a huge tree into a rainwater tank. With friction and stone, they somehow forced a spark into a flame. Fire was everything: clean water, cooked food, warmth, light. So they made one rule: the fire does not go out. Day and night, someone always watched the embers. They split their work. 2 on food and farming, garden, fishing, chickens. 2 on water and cooking, filling the cistern, preparing meals, guarding the fire. 2 on lookout, scanning the sea, and keeping a signal fire ready on the highest ridge. And when most people would have given up, they did something unexpected. They built a gym. Scrap wood, rope, a place to lift, box, and play games, not just for fun, to stay strong and keep their minds from breaking. Every morning and evening, they prayed and sang together. Their Catholic schooling gave them songs and rituals to fight loneliness. Remember, these were 13 to 16-year-old kids. No YouTube tutorials, no survival manuals, just trial and error. They were turning a haunted rock into a home. On an island made of cliffs and wet stone, one mistake could still kill you. And soon one almost did. One day, while climbing the cliffs, maybe for seabird eggs, maybe just to scout Stephen, fate lost his footing. He fell. He crashed down a rocky slope and landed hard. His leg snapped. Not a small crack, a serious break. On an empty island with no doctor, no hospital, no painkillers. A broken leg can mean infection, permanent disability, even death. Their whole system was about to be tested. For a moment, panic, then something else. They did what they'd seen adults do. They straightened the leg as best they could. Used sticks as splints and leaves for padding. Tore strips of cloth for bandages. Built a proper bed for fate inside one of the huts. From then on, someone was always checking on him, bringing food, bringing water, changing bandages. The others picked up his work. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. Slowly the bone knit. The leg healed, a little crooked but strong enough to walk. Years later, doctors would look at that leg and be stunned at what 6 untrained teenagers had pulled off. They hadn't abandoned their injured friend. They had redesigned their tiny society to protect him. But if you think that means they never fought, think again. Put 6 hungry teenage boys on a rock in the middle of the ocean, and you don't get peace. You get explosions. They argued about food, about chores, about who had to stay up on night watch. Sometimes it turned into shoving, Sometimes fists flew. So they made one rule that, without them knowing, might have saved their little society. If you got into a serious fight, you went to opposite ends of the island. No revenge. No gangs. No piling on. Just time out, cool off, come back, apologize. Grudges never got the chance to rot. When they had extra, a good fishing day, a big harvest, they shared. When storms smashed their garden or soaked their huts, they suffered it together. And always on the high ridge, the signal fire waited, a pile of dry wood ready to pour smoke into the sky if a ship ever appeared. That fragile piece would have to hold, not for days, but for 15 long months. Time on an island is strange. Their hair grew long. Their faces sharpened. School uniforms turned to rags and then to scraps. They learned every inch of Otta. The ledges where tired seabirds landed, easy to grab or snare. The rocks where fish gathered. Hidden pockets of roots and fruit in sheltered valleys. They rode out storms that tore at their huts and flattened their garden. Rains filled their cistern but threatened landslides, and dry spells forced them to ration every drop. Some nights they wrestled, played, told stories, sang. Other nights they must have looked at the endless dark water and felt like the world had forgotten them. Somewhere out there, their families had already buried empty coffins. People were learning to live with the idea that these boys were gone. The boys on Otta had no idea. All they could do was survive the next day and keep watching the horizon. If you were 15, stuck on a deserted island with your friends, how long before you'd stop looking at the horizon? They kept looking. And then, one morning in September 1966, someone finally appeared to look back. The man who finally spotted them was Peter Warner, captain of a fishing trawler licensed to work near Tonga. He was a rich businessman's son who had run away to live at sea himself. On September 11, 1966, his boat, the Just David, passed near Otta. He'd been told the island was empty, but he steered closer, scouting for new fishing grounds. As his ship neared the cliffs, he saw something impossible. Burn marks. Terraces that looked farmed. But Otta was supposed to be abandoned. Curious, he sounded the ship's horn. On the island, the boys froze. An engine. It was a sound they hadn't heard in more than a year. They ran, down the paths they'd carved into the rock, across the sharp stones. Then they dived into the sea and swam hard towards the boat, shouting and waving. When 6 wild-haired, almost naked figures suddenly appeared out of nowhere, shouting in a strange language. The crew of the Just David honestly didn't know what they were looking at. Ghost castaways, something worse. The boys scrambled up the side of the trawler, dripping, shaking. Then Mano stepped forward, hair to his shoulders, and in clear English said, "We are 6 boys from Tonga, and we have been on this island for 15 months. Silence. Peter Warner grabbed the radio and called Nuku'alofa. Have found 6 boys on Otta, over. At first, the answer was disbelief. The names he read out matched 6 boys who had disappeared more than a year earlier, boys whose funerals had already been held. And now suddenly they were alive. Back in Tonga, church bells began to ring. The dead had returned. On board the Just David, Warner and his crew were careful. After so long with limited food, eating too much too fast could kill them. So the boys got small meals slowly increased, clean water, dry clothes, a real bed. They carved rough ukuleles from scrap and sang songs of thanks. When the trawler finally pulled into Tonga, the dock exploded. Parents pushed through the crowd just to touch their sons. Brothers and sisters clung to them, sobbing. 6 boys who had left as students had come back as hardened survivors. But their problems didn't end when they left the island. Back home, the law was waiting. They had, after all, stolen a boat. Under Tongan law, stealing a boat was still a crime, even if you'd almost died on it. The owner wanted compensation. In theory, the boys could go straight from a desert island into a jail cell. The case went all the way up to the king of Tonga. He listened to the story, he thought. Then he made his decision. The boys were pardoned. No jail, no fines. And Peter Warner, his fishing license was renewed. Warner then did something else. He hired all 6 boys to work on his boats. One of them, Sione, would sail with him for decades. Their trauma didn't magically disappear, but they carried something very few people ever do. The knowledge that together, they had survived something almost impossible. For decades, one story has shaped how many of us imagine kids left alone without adults. Lord of the Flies. In the novel, a group of boys stranded on an island descend into violence and cruelty. The 6 boys on Ada had almost the same starting point. But their real-life story went in the opposite direction. In Lord of the Flies, the boys turned savage. On Ada, the boys made rules and routines. Shared food and work. Healed the injured instead of abandoning them. Cooled off after fights, then forgave. Prayed and sang together. And kept hope alive with a signal fire, month after month. They didn't build a nightmare. They built a small, working community. Yes, they were lucky. The island had springs, old terraces, chickens, and a fisherman with sharp eyes happened to pass by. But luck doesn't keep a fire alive for a year. Luck doesn't stop you from killing each other when you're starving. That comes from choices. Between the night they pushed that stolen boat into the dark and the day they climbed onto Peter Warner's trawler, more than 400 sunrises and sunsets passed over Ada. They were supposed to be just another Pacific tragedy. Instead, they left us a different kind of story. A real example of resilience, cooperation, and the quiet heroism of teenagers who refuse to let each other die. This account comes from Peter Warner's memoir, interviews with the survivors, Tongan records, and modern research, especially by journalist Rutger Bregman. If this story changed the way you think about Lord of the Flies, or about what kids are capable of, hit like so more people can hear it. And for more true survival stories, shipwrecks, castaways, impossible fights against nature, subscribe. More are coming.